Oh, this is so exciting. I see so many familiar faces. Feel like children's television. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this lovely show and tell that is being produced by our friends at Design Observer. Betsy Vardell, our producer, is going to wave. There she is. She apologizes for the link being a little late, but our hearts are in the right place. We have found during the pandemic especially that we all really miss seeing each other, but we also miss seeing work. And so after much experimentation, we've just started inviting people once a month to come and take us through their work and show us their studios. And we're delighted today to be joined by a favorite of ours, Barbara Glauber, who is so many things, a dear friend of mine, a dear friend to many of you. I think there's quite a few people here today who are her former students or current students. Barbara has taught for many years at Yale in the wonderful prelim program, which is the 3-year program at the Yale School of Art, which is sort of the jewel in the crown of the Yale School of Art program, in my opinion. And Barbara is the cornerstone of that program. And she also teaches at Cooper Union. And when she's not doing those two wonderful things, she is designing books. And her book design is really something quite remarkable. And so we're really delighted that you've all been able to join us from all over the world. I imagine we have some people dialing in from Europe, which is why we do this at lunchtime, so we can get people to join us from Europe. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara. The way this is going to work is we'd love to see your faces on camera. We're going to ask you to mute yourselves. Put your questions for Barbara in the chat. We'll try to leave time at the end for her to answer them. And it's probably a small enough group that we'll ask you to unmute yourself at that time and you can ask the question yourself. So for now, Barbara Glauber in New York City, welcome. And thank you for sharing your work with us today.
Thank you. Well, it's very weird to give a lecture sitting at the screen where I make all my work, but I guess it's appropriate. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm a longtime fan of Design Observer, and I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to just jump right in and share my screen, which hopefully you are seeing. So, like a book designer, I have some marbled paper, but with halftone on it, which I use for various things. And it's part of one of my strategies, which is to sort of recycle stuff I've made before and to excavate and whatever I'm given and try and look for parts I can use and repurpose and turn them into a system. So hopefully that will be clear. I have to begin by acknowledging the fantastically talented people who've worked in my studio over the years. Maybe some are here, at least I know one is. There's only 2 of us at a time working in a small space, so our ability to tolerate each other on a daily basis is essential. I took these typefaces from their invoices. This is the view on the other side of my monitor, so right out there. I've been in a cable building for over 20 years, and where I used to watch the sunset, I now see my window reflected in the windows of this horrid new NYU building that's been under construction for what seems like 10 years, but it's probably only been like 2. Here's a zoom view of behind, what's behind me. I've been lucky to be able to work here during the pandemic, though now I have to work alone. I miss you, Taylor. Becoming a book designer is like deciding to play the harp. You're stuck housing and hauling these large, heavy things. So I have books squirreled away in every corner of this office. But right before the pandemic, I had this cabinet on the left built to store some recent book samples. And this is the, what I thought I would do today is take you on a heavy meta book tour, focusing on the scenarios and strategies of a variety of book projects that I thought would work well on Zoom and highlight the cast of collaborators it takes to make a book and showing some of the process as well. This is the order of the books I'll be talking about as they sit in my cabinet. I try to keep a moleskin notebook with me all the time. And when I get a new one, I make a little drawing of my current projects on the first page to remember what I actually forget what I'm working on. So I make this little drawing. So I scavenged through them to find the drawings of all the books I'm going to talk about today. So don't be alarmed. I'm not going to go in depth on 12 books. I'm going to show you a little part that makes a point that I think might be interesting. So I'm beginning with Hilma af Klint. I knew nothing about the early 20th century Swedish painter when the Guggenheim hired me to work on a catalog that would accompany her largest exhibition. Her story was fascinating, and she essentially made abstract work before Kandinsky and Mondrian. It was really exciting to work on an exhibition catalog for a show in New York City. And one thing to note about a museum publication, they're often distributed widely and need to be able to be printed and bound in relatively conventional ways. So you can't do a whole lot of weird stuff. Every institution is different. You get a weird building with the Guggenheim, and an amazing building. And these are my notes from my first meeting. And I love down at the bottom, it's like the way they phrase it is 5 turns of the rotunda. I was like, oh, this is so exciting. And I'm just kind of a giant art and design nerd anyway. So doing something there was pretty exciting. So it was going to be a survey of nearly all of her mature work. And so I needed to make a format that would house this range of that she had produced. So to prepare, I read everything my clients sent, almost everything my clients send me. And Helma produced her work in series, the most famous being the 10 largest from 1907. Can you believe these are from 1907? So I based the proportions of the book on running these as large as possible. I don't believe these remarkable works had ever been seen outside of Europe. So the bulk of the book consists of large plates. So the blue lines on this grid show you where the artwork is centered on the page, with the green showing you this green line showing the center. And several works in the Parsifal series of smaller works could be ganged up on a spread. So she worked in series. So I needed to accommodate the way the captions work on the page. So the far left, I needed 5 columns because we'd end up at most with 5 images or 4 images on a page. So it's 5 columns. So I took a 15-column grid and broke it down into 5 3-column grids, and the series being on the far left. So there's a hierarchy in text weight, but also in position. So the plates are ordered chronologically and occasionally interrupted by short thematic essays. So these are on 6 columns, it makes 2 columns of the 15-column grid. And then the 2 long essays and an interview are at the front of the book and print on an uncoated stock. And this contrasts with the coated stock used for the plates. So one of the great things about working with an established museum is a publications department, and they oversee the printing and coordinate the proofing. So they went on press with this and tested all the uncoated paper. It's really hard to print work on uncoated paper, but they made sure it worked beautifully. And I'm really grateful for that. Here I am at the opening, and that's, of course, one of the 10 largest behind me. And it was all the rage, this show, and it was pretty exciting to have been a part of it. And the book is now, I think, in its like 6th printing. So here it is at the Strand, and on the right, it's with another book I designed for Kehinde Wiley for the Brooklyn Museum. The next project I wanted to share is Nicholas Krushenik. And he is, this show is for the Tang Teaching Museum at Skidmore College. The curator, Ian Barry, and I have had a long collaboration making over 2 dozen books together. And if he likes it, I know I will like it too. These happen in a different order because the book is made after the exhibition, and I happened to be there when they were installing it. So I got to actually go and look at the work, which is an extremely rare occurrence. On occasion, I have been taken into the vault somewhere, and that is when I got to do that at Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it was just like a Duchamp went by, and it was very exciting. But anyways, here they are. And one of the things about Krushnik's work was the way it addresses the edges. So, you know, the painting itself might wrap around, or on the far left be cut out. But the compositions also incorporate the edges as a part of their strategies. So we tried out a bunch of these. They were super fun to work with. We would print them out small and, you know, fold them so we could see them as three-dimensional objects. So as I said, the place like the Guggenheim gets to, you know, they handle the production. In the smaller situations, like with the Tang, I handle it. And another factor in this is that the Tang will photograph the work they have, but they don't have, this was going to include a huge range of his work. So they're getting images from everywhere, and they're of varying quality. So one of the things we got lucky with is that he used the same colors on his work. So I just sent these Pantone chips to our printer in Belgium and said, like, that green is that, so just match it all across. So the fact that they might change in lighting environments didn't matter. They really, in their original palette, they're the same. And so here, and another thing that one has to reckon with is approval. And this can be tricky. And sometimes I say that the best artist to work with is a dead one, but I have worked with some very wonderful living artists. In this case, when someone is no longer living, it might be their foundation. And in this case, it was the artist's widow and the gallery. So to have this meeting, I assembled a really small version of the entire book and trimmed it out. And Irma Boom makes mini versions of all of her books. I think it's such a pain in the ass, and I regret it every time I decide to do it. But I also make a three-dimensional mock-up of the book as an object. So it's trimmed to size and I use foam core and then wrap it. And in this case, you can see the red edging. I wanted to edge the book in red. So it's really tattered because it's sat on my shelf. But I bring this with me, and people actually really like those. So the layout of the book is also pretty simple. It's a lot of plates, and like Hilma, they're also centered. However, there's this border on the outside edge, and you can kind of see it along the outside edge so that the captions, you know, cling to that outer edge and sit on it on the, you know, left and on the bottom. And then the page number is hitting that grid line as well. And then we, you know, interspersed in it, it's a little hard to see. There is a tone behind this shaped work, but there's photography in it, and then sketches as well. And then essay pages have this red border that matches the red of the outside edge. So they're sort of like separated from the plates themselves and framed in red. So this also raises another important collaborator, which is your printer. And I can't tell you how many times I sent an email said, the trim is crucial on this. You have to get the trim right. And they did, actually did a really, really good job with this. This was Decura in Belgium. But in the back of the book, Ian was really interested in running these old reviews of Krushnik's work. So he finds lots of things, and then I have to figure out, I mean, it's fun, find places for them. So in this case, there are these little sketches that Krushnik made, and we use them to mark the beginnings of each of these reviews. Here's the final book. We had there's a little question about the cover title, and so we just took it off. And this is something you would never get to do for a large museum, but we could do it with Krushnik. So this is the final composition of the front and the spine. So, I mean, it did make up for the fact that there's no title by having this giant Krushnik on the spine. And then there was just lots of fun things to be able to pick for the back cover. And here it is. Unfortunately, these are all shrink wrapped, but at the gallery, they just had propped them up on a wall. This book documents an exhibition of 6 pieces by the Ghanaian artist El Anatsui. Caps taken from liquor bottles are transformed into shimmering wall hangings. The metal is crushed and folded into a variety of shapes that are then bound together with copper wire. And each venue can choose to drape these in any way. They have an irregular edge, but they drape, and anyone can put them in any shape that they would like. So for this, the contributions, so they were divided in sections by the 6 artworks with different people contributing. And the lengths were quite different. So, you know, it wouldn't be enough to fill a page, or it's more than 2. So I just ran them like a register tape, one after another. And you can see this in my sketch. Like I drew it up there at the top, and I say a roll of adding machine tape. And then I'm sort of keeping in mind the whole structure of the book while I make these decisions, and think like these serve as kind of reminders to me. You know, I have my InDesign files, but I can kind of have an overview through these sketches, like, oh, that's the entire piece. Oh, I'm gonna need these openers. How do these parts make a whole? So this, I went to see the exhibition when it was up, but I couldn't go in person to present it. So this is the PDF I sent along with it. I sent sample pages, but I explained it. So one of the things I wanted to do was make an exposed sewn binding. Those are the ones where you see the stitching on the edge. So I had to try to explain that to them. So you can see these slivers of his name on the spine. And then I show how they have to wrap around the signature. So when it's exposed, it reveals this name. And then on the right, I'm explaining how the essay titles work. So a patterned type. So I made these little like things that like out of, you know, slashes and punctuation, like modules, like his bottle caps that is repeated, and it helps separates the quotes, and it helps define the title, and a series of periods. It separates the bio and serves to end whatever the essay is. So here's a detail, and here you can kind of see the little shift in the letters in the spine. That's because they're wrapping around to form Ella Natsui when it's bound. So, you know, when it's stitched together, you get this. So it's not silk screened on there, it's printed on that outside edge. So again, I had to say, please, you know, be really accurate when you're trimming and binding this. So this is actually a kind of fun one that I did. Part of the curatorial program at the Tang Museum is devoted to interdisciplinary exhibitions that invite collaboration between faculty from different fields, like astrophysics, English, and economics. I love designing these catalogs as they allow for a wider range of graphic response, and I always learn something. The next 3 books that I'll show you are for these types of exhibitions. This one was curated by one of the curators at the museum, and a chemistry professor. And it was called Molecules That Matter. And it featured the 10 most important molecules of the 20th century. Gigantic ball and stick models were shown with ephemera and artwork relevant to such molecules as nylon, DDT, penicillin, and Prozac. So I made the cover out of polyethylene, which is one of the molecules. The biochemists just love this. I only could find 1 person to bind it, but they got the job. So I thought it would, each chapter opens with a portrait of the molecule itself. So I had these 3D rendering files, and I could kind of move my subject into an angle that I wanted. And I thought it would be interesting to put it in this imaginary, you know, to address this imaginary dimensional space in which science is visualized. So, you know, molecules don't, you know, if you look, they don't look like this, but this is how they're structured. So it's a way that we understand that the content. So it has a drop shadow in this weird space. So I made it's a little probably subtle, but the artwork has drop shadows too, whether it's a piece of ephemera like the car on the right in the iso-octane chapter, or an Ed Ruscha painting on the left. And then at the top, the running head, which is at the top, is actually just the two elements, which is hydrogen and carbon, that are in this particular molecule. So, you know, here it's 3, you get hydrogen, carbon and chlorine. But anyways, you'd get those little dots of, and that's all encoded. So here's one, here's a polyethylene chapter. And one other thing I got them to do was, like, they sent me, as they were working on this, these little factoids about the different molecules. And I found them really interesting. So I got them to include them as these little sidebars. So, you know, a lot of people don't read the text. So it, like, you got something out of the experience if you just read these little blurbs about them. And to be honest, some of these were fascinating and some of them were, like, isooctane gets pretty boring. And here's the third of these interdisciplinary exhibitions. So, you know, in some ways you can I can kind of go to town on these crazy, like, materials and formats. Oh wait, there's one more after this. This is the second one. So this is the one, oh, here it is. This is one book I finished last year. And it's another interdisciplinary exhibition. But it explored, like sugar, explored the problematic and joyful aspects of sugar, its cultivation and consumption, combining contemporary artworks with material culture and historical objects. So in the foreground of this installation shot is a sculpture based on caloric intake. There's a video of bees behind it and some stereoscopes of sugarcane workers. So one of my early ideas was to combine uncoated brown paper and a glossy coated sheet as a reflection of the raw and refined states of sugar. You can see my notes on the left. Like, I was like, well, maybe I'll go look up what sugar crystals are like. So I'm drawing what they are to think, you know, is there something in that I can riff on or use to make a system? So in the end, this is the cover, and it's a detail from Bushra Junaid's artwork that is layers, a stereograph of workers in a sugarcane field with headlines about sugar from that era. And on top of that is pink foil stamping. We drew this typographic ornament meets cake frosting border and printed it on the uncoated brown paper in magenta layered on white. So I wanted to also brand the exhibition title like candy. So I used James Edmondson's Hobo. And it took us like some press tests to get this magenta on brown paper to work. So it ended up being 2 coats of white and then the pink. Titles of longer essays are decorated with these icing borders as well. And the opposite page is a shorter essay in 2 columns. And there's one of the bee video. And here's a Kara Walker's, one of her sugar babies from the Domino sugar installation. And so the bulk of the back of the book is all the images, the pieces that were in the show, including the ephemera. And here's the back of the book with a sugar dish, a silver sugar dish on the back. And this piece, the Keystone View Company, is from the stereoscope that's on the cover. This is the last of the Tang interdisciplinary projects I'll share with you. It's a collaboration between the associate director and a math professor, and explored some of the ways humans create and manipulate patterns and why we are driven to do so. So it was a really super juicy subject with lots of design potential. And I've also always been drawn to layered patterns. In fact, I'm like wearing polka dots and stripes today. So I tried that out in a few different ways. The Finnish Foundry underwear has this cool tool that converts your type into ASCII. So that's what I was trying here. And it does it really accurately. But then I thought, well, maybe the idea of a halftone, that's what you have to use. It's the pattern that's in printing. So, but maybe the type could be converted into a pattern. Or what about the pattern of book printing? What about 16-page signatures as a pattern? So here I am kind of like working it out and then thinking about what if you wrapped each 16-page signature in something else to complicate that pattern. So you can see me looking at patterns and listing them and then making some other sketches of how type might do things. And then on the right is my frequently referenced 16-page signature increments that I keep on my desktop. So within that, I have to keep in mind the content and how long it is. So here's a list of all the essays and how long each one is, because I'm gonna have to, like a puzzle, put them together into this structure. And maybe it could be an expositone cover, or can I make these like hexagon shapes? I don't know. These are just some things. So I label my books with the thing above it, like the title, so I can find it easily. So I always label it with this little open thing. I don't know. It's a thing I do. So in the end, many of those experiments were going to be just too distracting to, be great, but it would not really serve the artwork very well. So I limited the shapes to dots and stripes and reduced the scale considerably. And then I decided that the patterns would just run on the edge of the book. So you'd have this really amazing page edge when you fanned the book. And what the leftover page size would be the proportions of the golden section, which was also mentioned in this exhibition. So in this case, I mean, I don't know if you care about this, but it's, yellow stripes, blue dots, blue stripes, red dots, red stripes, purple dots. So I carry one over into each of them. And I don't know if you're a nutty system person like me, you just can kind of go nuts on this. So here it is on the, like, if you just shift them slightly, these dots and things, you get these really interesting moires. So it's very subtle, but you're getting new patterns out of it. And I paired them with these big circles, and the circles change size as they go through the book. So, this is an essay at the beginning, and they get smaller as you go. So the disruption changes as well. And you get these kind of really interesting patterns out of it. And then, as you maybe can see here, I had the book stitched with yellow and blue thread. So it's a kind of like A-B kind of pattern. And the book is actually in 2 columns. And featured stuff like, dazzle pattern, which was intended to confuse submarines during World War II. I think I missed one. Incivity, which is from, I gotta find my notes so I can do justice to it. It's from Nigeria, and it's a secret graphic system. And on the left, the artist Victor Ekpuk got to played on this with this chalk drawing that was done in the museum, but there's a piece of cloth that features it on the right. And then, so here you can see the 2 columns, and these actually pieces are called snowflakes. They're actually just computer generated snowflakes. And here's the final book. And it has a clear jacket, which allows you to get some type without having to piece it all together like my Ella Natsui book on the spine. So it's silkscreen in fluorescent orange. And then when the jacket moves, so the orange is on the jacket, you get these kind of crazy patterns. This book for the Hirshhorn highlighted a collection of Duchamp works that were being donated to the DC-based museum. And so this is a different kind of project in that I saw this, I mean, I know who Duchamp is, I took art history, but I thought it would be a really interesting opportunity to learn more. It's kind of like I make a design as a paper for my graduate seminar. So I didn't have time to read, tons of books on Duchamp, but I skimmed a lot, read a lot of chronologies and about particular works. So as an artist who found complex ways to engage the subject of reproduction, Duchamp was an intriguing subject to translate into book form. But it had to be, again, so we're back to like standard museum form. So I can't do any crazy binding and no weird materials. It's basic ink on paper. So I've done many books with the wonderful Mary Delmonico of Delmonico Books. And but publishers need to get orders for their books in advance. So they often need a cover before anything else. They always say you can change it later, but it does sort of it sometimes is a good way to jumpstart the engagement with the content. So this is actually the finished book, but you know, one of the most famous pieces of Duchamp's is the green box, which has this dotted typeface on it. And I found it online. Nina Stosinger had done it, and I downloaded it for free. So, you know, doing your homework on finding type is also a really, really important. So for the body copy, I used, oh wait, here, I think I'll just jump back up again. Each plate would be accompanied by a spread about that artwork. So this one's called Hidden Noise. It rattles actually if you move it. So there's a lot of hidden messages in Duchamp's work. And so I inverted it on the following page. So it connects this text to that, but also addresses Duchamp's concept of the infrathin. Like he was really interested in the space between positive and negative. And I thought this was kind of an interesting way to engage it. And in fact, in that work, you never know what's inside the ball of twine, but also it's got like a weird message inscribed on the bottom. So here's a piece that are these sink stoppers that he made. And if you look on the right, you see a little Duchamp running head made out of the Celavi typefaces. And then I flopped it on the other page. So it kind of has a, you know, recto and verso relationship. So here again, it's always just the image on the left that, you know, inverts on the following page. And another thing that I decided to do was, in looking at Duchamp's printed pieces, there are a lot of French typefaces, one of which is Antique Olive by Roger Escafon. And I thought that would be a really interesting face to use. So I chose that for the body copy. But then I realized that Christian Schwartz had redrawn Antique Olive from memory and called that typeface duplicate. So the little caption is a duplicate and the longer text is in Antique Olive. And one of the great things, it's very helpful to know type designers, is I really wanted old style figures, which were not available. So Christian is a lovely guy. And I was like, Christian, can I have some old style numerals? And he made them for me. So this is a project for the Philadelphia Museum of Art of an exhibition of mixed media artists who created an art form designed around the body in the 60s and 70s. And this project shows how type can, you know, I did it a little bit in an excavation in the previous one, but here it's like how you can adapt typography as a way to reflect that content. So we started by thinking of like warp and weft and how that could come together in a typeface. It just, you know, I don't know if you know this piece by Jeff McFettridge, but he has this bear sitting at a bar stool with a cigarette and a like beer. And it says, I'm rocking on your dime. So, you know, finding something that I think is fun to do is, you know, part of the fun of making the work. I don't actually do a lot of work outside my commissioned work. So this is where I have my fun. Anyway, so you can see my drawings about like, how can two lines or threads come together to make these letter forms? And this is what we presented to them, along with this running arm that's like a thread. And I thought that would be really interesting if what I think there were like 5 chapters in the book, if they all had this like thread that went, so it's kind of like a seam that's on the outside edge of the book. So nothing actually bled except for these big chapter openers off the sides. The right side, the outer sides. But it turned out that for the curator, that reference was not accurate because a lot of this work was like macrame or applique or constructed out of plastic. So warp and weft was like broadcloth, like commercially available woven broadcloth. So we needed to think of another way to do that. So here's some more of that work to just show you that it was like, you know, it's army men attached to a vest or, you know, knitted snakes or tie-dye. So one thing was the curator was interested in allowing us to have sort of some type that maybe reflected that 60s and 70s era. So I put the zipper. So each chapter had different typeface, which we then interpreted through a line. So here it's lazy bones, and Taylor drew this with a line, so it's sort of like you've woven this, and sort of we tried to come up with a logic for creating these that were used on the divider pages. And here's the actual book, and I can't really remember all of the content so well, but there was a reason that we would pick this method and that typeface to make these interpretations. So here's all 5 of them. They were a lot of fun, and Taylor did an awesome job drawing them. And there's the cover. So here, like this piece has like applique, it's made with a knitting machine, but also has applique on it. And here it is at the opening, and I also edged it in red. And I went to the opening, and there were some really incredible outfits at this opening. So next is Swedish wooden toys. So these next 3 books are all for the Bard Graduate Center, which, if you're not familiar with, focuses on design history, material culture, and decorative arts. So design is content. But they're really scholarly tomes, and not just, eye candy bookshelf porn. So they have like serious like dissertations on circus tents or something in them. So this is the cover for a book on Swedish wooden toys, and many of the toys were puzzles or manipulables. So we used a stencil font on the cover and then took it apart on the back cover. So that's all the letters on the cover, but taken apart on the back. And the images are composed like stacked blocks. So, so it was kind of nice to have a theory or a conceptual framework for how to arrange images. And there's these little tiny colors underneath them, and they link up to the arrows. So you can match your caption to whatever image by just matching those colors. I don't have an image of them in the text, but I also underlined where they were referenced in the text, so you could find that color as well. I almost killed myself doing that, but I did it. So here's the contents page that uses a palette that like what looks like blocks, but it also references the colors that are were more typical of these kinds of toys. And the color bar matches a tab on the outer right edge that is the same color. So it's like a thumb tab. So, I stacked the title, and the uncapitalized words are called catchwords. So they are unpainted, they're on the wood. Everything is like this beautiful light, Baltic birch, maple, the wood that you associate with Scandinavian design. And here's me sort of like pulling, this is another one of those sketches, but I'm pulling a whole book together to see what the parts are and how I want them to go together. So it's like how I think through it. And here's the printed spread, and it's a little blown out, but so it's a color on the right, and then it's just a piece of wood on the left on that back side. So you get this, they sort of end up getting a little bit of a color, but you can see the chapters. And then sometimes you make a system and then something kind of breaks that system. I really kind of wanted these to be objects with shadows that went on these blank things, but I had a photograph, so I had to figure out, and this happens frequently, like I have to figure out something that kind of breaks my system. Like, how can I expand those constraints to allow for all of these situations? And this is actually the first project I did for Bard. So that's that, you have that kind of negotiations of how you're going to communicate, what they're like, how they communicate. But I figured that out. They were, most publications on the circus celebrate the playful, exaggerated imagery taken from the performers, posters, and sets. But this was a book of 17 serious essays, some of which dealt with the harsh realities of the circus, like mistreated elephants and people with disabilities. So my approach needed to be not fun. So this was a really interesting design problem, since I didn't feel right to just, roll over and not do anything, but and ignore this vibrant visual language. So I tried to think of the book as, I mean, these are really stupid examples, but like, is it like Meryl Streep in a Judd Apatow movie, or like Adam Sandler in Death of a Salesman, just something where it's like one twist to it. So maybe that could be an element that's modernized or like circusified. So I took the typeface bow and I added these little Tuscan edges to it. And I striped the whole book so that it's like a circus tent. And the outer edge is all silk screened in stripes. Spine is striped. And of course, this great clown had a striped shirt on. But he's also like, you see the artifice, like you see the line on his bald cap. And he also sadly committed suicide. So, there's this other level to this kind of a book. This is, I have a lot of fun doing the end page. I don't know why, but I do end up presenting the front matter to Bard. And because this is not art, but it's design, I think I had a little bit more freedom to do things. So it's the top of the circus tent. So, just how reductive you can be and still kind of convey that message. And then this is the title page, and Madame Omega here is balancing on one of my lines. Anyways, I do really enjoy that aspect of making a book as well. So they then asked me, my most recent book for them, which is still it's a few years ago now, was to do a book for Charles Percier, who is Napoleon's architect. So this isn't the circus. This isn't some pretty toys. This is like really ornate old work. And it was interesting. It was like, now how am I going to make that? But they wanted it to be contemporary. So one of the things I'd kind of forgotten, I made a presentation for them and sort of showed them how I used Jan Tschickel's classic book grid. And I also was like showing them that I was looking at Percier was known as like a really good draftsman. So most of the book are these like incredible, they're really beautiful drawings. But I also wanted to sort of show them that a lot of those things are reliefs. So they're flat, so they emulate dimension, but they're not actually dimensional objects. So I thought that might be kind of fun to pick up in the type itself. So I use this like type that's thick and thin, and it has no serifs. Or something with a shadow, but no ornament on it. And then I translated that into these other elements, like these frames that cast a shadow, or doubled rules, or swelled rules. So this is kind of my palette of forms for the book. And so here you can see it on one of the pages. It has, that's actually, if we go back to my grid, I take this grid and I move it to the outside edges. So it's that grid inset into the page on the right. And then I mix these typefaces up for it. And then that grid you see throughout the book, and it's disrupted by these photos. And here's the cover. So, his work itself is kind of this like crazy collage. So the swirl on the left is from the L'Arc de Triomphe du Carousel in Paris. And then there's this watercolor in the middle, and then a ceiling design on the right. So I made it so that when you turn it, this is the end paper. So this is one of his ceiling designs on the right, and you turn, it doesn't match exactly like, but this is a PDF of the final. And then you turn and you get the back side of the end paper and page one, the half title. So I thought this was actually a pretty interesting way to bring you into that book. And I mean, this is pretty contemporary. So, I mean, you can't fault me for that. I mean, they actually really loved it, but it was an interesting problem to solve given the criteria. And then the last book I'm going to show you is this Sister Carita book that I made, which I love Carita, and this was a really amazing project. With Catholicism, teaching, typography, and Los Angeles in common, Sister Carita's name came up many times in my career. But since she slipped through the cracks of both art and design history, I didn't know very much about her. So I was thrilled when Ian Barry of the Tang Museum asked me to design a catalog of her work, and it would be published by Mary Delmonico. her work consists mainly of these large letters, silk screened using hand cut stencils on textured paper. So the cover emphasizes that material. These are not like a PDF. You can see roughness and you can see the paper. You can see how different inks responded to the paper. So, you know, I wanted to make sure that was apparent on the cover itself. I figured that if Carita owned large and imprecise, I needed to do the opposite and use relatively small, precise type to clarify what was her work and what was my strategy or my design. Her type in many of her works runs horizontal, backwards, and upside down. So running the caption vertically in the gutter wasn't going to be too challenging for the viewer. And this is actually a hard sell. You can hardly ever get anybody to do this, but this seemed to be the place to do it. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that this was printed at Trifolio in Italy, and the printer is amazing, and you kind of have to turn your stuff over to him. And Mary had worked things out with him, but he used fluorescent ink too. So these look amazing, and they look a lot like, when I saw the exhibit, I wrote down all the colors that were in things and where things were fluorescent. And it helped us pick what sides of what signatures might have some fluorescent. I mean, ideally we would use more. And like this one, I think that the orange, and they look the same here, the orange dot and the pink dot, but I think they're actually a gradient, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so here's some more, and Ian went and found the works that Carita took apart to make these. So he found this in a magazine from the time, and then this is the headline that she took apart. I could talk about Carita. I have talked about Carita for a whole talk, but I'm going to do it briefly for now. The work was broken up into kind of 3 phases of her life, and it was separated by this 20,000 word oral history. And I printed that on a tint, but it's a gradient. So it changes from like purple into blue and into green as you go through the book. And that sort of references what in silk screening you call a split font. So you have 2 inks on the screen and you mix them together. And that's one of the things that Carita would do on her silk screens. So another thing about Carita is that she, in part of her teaching, one of the things she's famous for was getting people to use what she called a finder. This is really just a slide, but you walked around with this cut hole in it that was about the size of a 35mm slide mount, and you were supposed to look at the world through this finder. And so I thought that I would do that to her posters to get initial caps. So this is one of her posters, and I just took a C out of it, and it's in those proportions. And then, here's a T for this section. And then any quote by Carita, I pulled out in Cooper Black. So you could find it pretty easily. So throughout the whole book, whenever there's a quote from Carita, you see it in Cooper Black. And then, like, here's what, an essay, there's some short essays at the beginning. Isn't that great? Them on the camels in front of the pyramids. And then here's another initial cap. And then I set her artwork titles in Antico Leave. And when they're illustrated, I like to make a reader-friendly book. So there's in the edges, you see what page they're illustrated on. And this is me doing it, and it's a total pain in the ass because then I have to look them all up. But it's really nice when a work is mentioned to know where it is in the book. And there's the last page of the book in which we die cut a finder hole. So you could, and it's actually perforated too. I doubt people have taken it apart, but you can go around with your own finder. And the end page is this photo of Carita silk screened. So that is it for my books, but I have another thing that I wanted to add as a little addendum, which is I was in Italy printing this book a year and a half ago at Conti. And when I was done, I went to Venice to see the Biennale. And as it happened, I was there during the Redentore, which is a 400-year-old festival celebrating the end of the plague. The Doge promised the people of Venice that he would build a magnificent church if the plague ended. And there it is, designed by Palladio. So each year, a floating bridge for 400, I mean, I don't know if they've done it every year, but this has been celebrated for 400 years. And they build a floating bridge to connect Giudecca Island to the rest of Venice. And it's only up for like 2 days, and you cross, and the banks of the canal are lined with these globes. And it's a giant party for everyone in the Veneto. So people come out in their boats that go, you know, are in the basin, and there's, look at, none of these guys have shirts on, and, you know, they're having giant parties and they're eating food by the banks of the canal. And then there's a huge fireworks display, like 40-minute long fireworks display. And I thought, given this moment in time, this would be a very nice way to end.
Amazing. Oh my God. Well, we're going to download for you the chat window, which shows so much Barbara Glauber love that you're going to have to be maybe sitting down with a strong drink when you drink it. We have 10 minutes left, 7 minutes left. Does anybody want to ask Barbara a question about this magnificent body of work? Jump in.
What's your favorite book?
Oh boy, that's like, you know what I'm gonna say.
That's like, what's your favorite child? Who's your favorite child?
Yeah. I do have, I mean, you know, if there was a fire, and I had to run out of here, I might pick Carita because the content's so good. And now, of course, maybe Hilma's in there too, even though I don't think my book design is as exciting, but the work is so beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't be shy.
How do you think book design has changed?
Well, I guess I've been doing it for 25 years or maybe 30 years or something like that. And in the beginning, I mean, obviously technology changed it a lot, but also the way books work. I think Lorraine Wild kind of had an interesting take on this, and I'm paraphrasing and probably mischaracterizing it, but it was something to the effect of like, you go to a museum and you can't buy the work, but you can buy the book. So as a way to, it like makes art attainable. And I think that, you know, given our screens, the Baroque printing is that much more prominent now. Like, ooh, foil stamps, you know, these things that you, and ways that books can feel, things that will not communicate through a screen. So I would say those are some ways that it's changed.
One of the things that I'm always remarking on when I look at your work, I mean, we've done lots of projects like this together, Barbara, where we've got you on tape at one point showing these things, showing your grids. And I love the slides where you actually brought the grids in sequentially and showed us the visual logic of your thinking. But one of the things that I always remark about is your ability to reinvent yourself with each project. And I think so many designers get stuck in this mold that either their clients expect them to do what they did last time, or they're building a body of work around a certain kind of conformity to a vision that becomes their brand. Right. You are so the opposite of that. And your joy in these collaborations with these artists is so evident. But that seems really unusual. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how you sort of dive in with these typographic understandings and all of these different ways of approaching work depending on the work itself?
Well, that's like a really great question. And I do think that I have a self-selecting clientele. They know this is how I do work, and they hire me to bring whatever, like you have no clue what you're going to get if I design your book. You just have to trust that I'm going to do it. So, you know, there'll be museums and curators who never hire me because of that. And that's okay. I mean, I don't probably want to work with those people if they have some fixed idea of how that's going to work. I mean, if I actually charted it out, which at one time I thought I would, is who I work with and how and why. And I have a lot of repeat clients. I am completely allergic to self-promotion. My website has said coming soon for 11 fucking years. So
yeah, we noticed that.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? And so anyways, you know, I have a lot of the same people, but then somebody tells somebody else about them. And then, you know, it's kind of fun to establish a new rapport with somebody. And because I think I look closely and I read closely, so I'm looking too. So I'm like, oh, look at that Krushenik stuff. He's using edges. well, I'm going to use edges, or, you know, oh, this work is all uneven, I'm going to be all straightened up, you know, whatever it is. Like, I understand that it's a visual form and I need to provide a wrapper that's responsive to that form. So I do a lot of that, and, you know, people like it when you've paid attention to what they've done. They still say to me like, oh, you read it? Of course I did.
We've got I'm noticing 4 former students of yours here, and I would love it if Emily, Alicia, Sarah, maybe Sarah left, or Layla, somebody could actually jump in here and say something about this work relative to your own work and being Barbara's student, because I think so much a part of what you've done for so many years is inspire all of these students who are here, all have their own remarkable careers. Could one of you speak up on her behalf and say something?
I would be honored. My exhaustion of my mom, any one of us who has children right now, I just want to say shout out to you. As a tired mom, I had the absolute gift of having Barbara as my teacher at Yale. And then I had the gift of continuing Yale and continuing the masterclass that is Barbara Glauber. And I worked at Heavy Meta for 2 years. And Barbara's generosity of process and her generosity to her students and her generosity to those who have the privilege of working with her is legendary. And the loyalty that, Barbara, you described about your clients, it goes with, you know, goes with your students too. I think you just give so much. And I know even just working beside you on the Wednesdays, you go to Yale, and it takes 3 hours each way, I believe, for you to go up there, and you would do it every single week for years and years and years. And I think that even just shows devotion to the generosity of your brain and your heart in teaching. And I've completely started a practice just in honor of what you taught me, and raised a child because I saw you raise your son. So as a working mother in particular, it's a joy to see you flourish. And I am going to also, I think the New Yorker needs to do a profile about you. I felt this way for a while. Like, it really needs, I think, you know, this was a masterclass. Several people said it in the chat. But I just think, you know, Irma Boom, she's had her time in the sun. I think it's your time now.
Oh, you're
I said it. I'm going on record too.
I think you have a lot of people seconding that.
Right?
Yeah, Sarah is absolutely.
Right?
And really,
Barbara's
seriously,
the true queen. To me, she's always been the best book designer in America. And I just think
there's no question. No question.
Well, I think of Irma as like a book sculptor, and I'm a book painter. You know, I make more different parts, and my machines have a greater range of parts, and hers are like, it's like a Play-Doh pumper. They're amazing, amazing, amazing. I have a lot of them, but it's a different approach. You know, it doesn't always really respond to the cultural aspects of that content. It's a structure, a really amazing structure, but I tend to respond to the sort of, you know, some formal or cultural or social content in the books.
So Abby's had her hand up for a while. Abby, do you want to ask your
sorry.
question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about, you know, I'm noticing that variable types are kind of coming out and becoming more popular or more used. You use a lot of old faces. How do you feel about using variable types in your book designs?
All right, I have
printed matter.
I don't know how to use them. I am
Neither
very,
do I.
and I it's one of those things I need to figure out. I will, but I haven't figured out how to use them yet. But they're on my radar because I actually look at them a lot. I'm like a type stalker, so I look at a lot of foundries and stuff because, you know, I always need. Actually, that's one of the things I didn't mention. When I'm starting out on a book project, if I buy a new typeface, oh, it makes my whole project so much easier because I like have something new to work with.
Yeah, me too. Me too. That's why I asked. Great. We're on the same page.
Be mindful. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to end this. We have to be mindful of everybody's time, especially Barbara's, because I'm sure she's got 47 books in the works. Emily, thank you for those lovely words about Barbara. And I think everybody agrees. We're going to download this chat and send it to you, Barbara. Barbara, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. It was fun. I mean, it was
really
inspiring. Thank you.
And we'll do it again in a couple of weeks. So if you have any people you want us to invite, it's going to be a very hard act to follow, but thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.